Whispering Creek's sorrow. Whispering Creek Ranch wasn't whispering much these days. It was more like a choked sob held back by dry earth and sun-bleached wood. The split-rail fence, once a proud boundary, sagged in places, held together more by stubborn habit than any real strength. The main house, a two-story structure built from sturdy timber, had a list to one side, like a weary traveler leaning into the wind. Paint peeled in ragged strips, revealing the gray bones beneath. The wind chimes, a gift from Sarah, hung silent on the porch, their delicate glass beads coated in dust. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale milk and unwashed laundry. Jedediah stumbled through the dimness, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Samuel, his son, was screaming, a high-pitched, relentless wail that clawed at Jedediah's already frayed nerves. He fumbled with the buttons of his flannel shirt, his large hands clumsy and shaking. "Hush, little man, hush," he murmured, his voice rough with exhaustion and grief. He lifted Samuel from the makeshift cradle, a laundry basket lined with Sarah's old quilts, and held him close. The baby's tiny body was stiff with distress, his face flushed and contorted. Jedediah walked, paced, bounced. He hummed a tuneless melody, a song Sarah used to sing, a song that now felt like a shard of glass in his throat. He could almost see her, standing by the stove, her hair pulled back in a braid, her eyes sparkling with laughter as she stirred a pot of stew. The memory was so vivid, so achingly real, that he squeezed his eyes shut, fighting back the tears that threatened to overwhelm him. "Mama's gone, Sammy," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. "She ain't coming back." He knew the baby couldn't understand, but he needed to say it to hear the truth spoken aloud. Samuel only cried harder, his small fists flailing. Jedediah felt a surge of panic. He hadn't slept properly in days. His meals were sporadic, and his knowledge of babies extended only to the vague memories of his own childhood. Sarah had always been the natural, the nurturer. He felt utterly lost without her. He checked the meager supply of formula Sarah had stocked before. It was nearly gone. He needed to figure something out, and soon. He carried Samuel outside, hoping the fresh air might soothe him. The sun beat down on the parched land, offering no comfort. The chickens pecked listlessly in the dust, their usual clucking replaced by a dispirited silence. Even the creek, which gave the ranch its name, seemed to have lost its voice, reduced to a trickle between cracked banks. "All right, little fella," Jedediah sighed, shifting Samuel in his arms. "Let's see if Bess is feeling generous today." Bess, the old milk cow, stood patiently in the shade of the barn, her tail swishing lazily at the flies. She was a gentle creature, a familiar presence on the ranch, but even Bess seemed to sense the change, the shift in the atmosphere. Her usually placid eyes held a hint of worry. Jedediah grabbed the milking stool and sat down beside her. He rested his forehead against her warm flank, inhaling the familiar scent of hay and manure. He remembered Sarah doing this so effortlessly, her hands moving with a practiced grace as the milk streamed into the pail. He positioned the pail, took a deep breath, and began to milk. But his hands were clumsy and awkward. He squeezed too hard, then not hard enough. The milk came in fits and starts, more foam than liquid. Bess shifted uneasily, her patience wearing thin. "Easy, girl," Jedediah muttered, his frustration growing. He tried again, focusing on Sarah's movements, trying to replicate her touch. But his mind was clouded with grief, his body heavy with exhaustion. After what felt like an eternity, he had barely managed to fill the bottom of the pail. Bess let out a mournful moo, a sound that seemed to echo the despair in Jedediah's heart. He knew he was failing. Failing Sarah, failing Samuel, failing the ranch. He stood up, his shoulders slumped, and kicked at the dirt. The pail clattered to the ground, spilling the meager amount of milk into the dust. Samuel's cries intensified, piercing the silence. Jedediah stared at the spilled milk, then at the crying baby, then at the desolate ranch. He felt a wave of hopelessness wash over him, so strong that it threatened to pull him under. He didn't know what to do, where to turn, or how he was going to make it through another day. He picked up Samuel, holding him close, and walked back towards the house. The setting sun cast long, mournful shadows across the yard, painting the ranch in shades of gray and despair. Whispering Creek wasn't whispering, it was weeping, the cry for milk. The infant's wail tore at Jedediah's fraying sanity. Samuel's cry, a fragile, desperate sound, bounced off the cabin walls, each rise and fall a tiny pickaxe chipping away at Jedediah's defenses. He scooped the boy up, rocking, jiggling, muttering useless reassurances, but the small body remained rigid, face crimson and twisted, tiny fists balled tight. "Easy now, little fella," Jedediah rasped, his throat raw. "Papa's right here, doing his best." But Samuel, lost in the tyranny of his needs, remained inconsolable. The emptiness in his gut was a ravenous beast. A fresh wave of despair washed over Jedediah. He'd tried everything: tepid water, a makeshift pacifier of cloth soaked in sugar, even crooning Sarah's lullaby, now a painful lump lodged in his windpipe. He knew the root of Samuel's distress: nourishment which he couldn't provide. Jedediah lurched to the window, his gaze sweeping the drought-ravaged land. The remaining cows, gaunt figures against the bleached grass, grazed with weary indifference. He had lacked the fortitude, or perhaps merely the will, to slaughter one for meat. Each represented a dwindling tether to the life he was losing. He lowered Samuel back into the cradle. The crying intensified instantly. Jedediah raked a hand through his matted hair, the ranch's ubiquitous dust clinging to his skin. He couldn't endure it. The sound, the helplessness, the crushing weight of his inadequacy. It was unbearable. One option remained, a bitter draught he'd been avoiding since Sarah's last breath. Harmony Gulch, begging for succor. The thought seared his chest like a branding iron, a mark of disgrace. Jedediah Walker, reduced to supplication. His father would spin in his grave. But his father wasn't here to witness his failure, and Samuel was. He snatched his worn leather coat from the peg, its familiar weight a scant comfort. He paused, his hand hovering over the rifle hanging beside it. No, this wasn't about defense. It was about pleading. He knelt by the cradle, tenderness softening his features as he gazed at his son. Samuel's face glistened with tears, his mouth working in silent distress. "I'll return, son," he vowed, his voice thick with emotion. "I promise. I'll find milk." He snugged the blanket tighter around Samuel before standing. Jedediah approached the small, grime-streaked mirror. The reflection staring back was haggard, weathered, a landscape of sorrow and desperation. The eyes, once alight with hope, were now sunken in haunted pools. He was a specter of his former self. He rubbed his bristled jaw, the coarse stubble scratching his palm. This was not the Jedediah Walker who had carved a life out of this unforgiving land, who had courted Sarah beneath the boundless Montana sky. This was a broken man, humbled by tragedy and circumstance. He squared his shoulders, inhaled deeply, and forced himself to meet his own gaze. He must do this, for Samuel's sake. Stepping out into the brutal sunlight, the familiar landscape felt alien and hostile. The wind, laced with the sense of dust and decay, buffeted him. He hitched the wagon, a rusty antique from a bygone era, to their aged mare, Bess. She shifted, her breath wheezing from her lungs. He patted her flank, offering a silent apology for the burden ahead. Turning to look back at the cabin, a small, forlorn structure against the vast prairie, he understood it represented everything he had forfeited, everything he was struggling to preserve. He flicked the reins, and Bess lurched forward, the wagon wheels emitting a mournful groan. Harmony Gulch lay to the west, a distant glimmer on the horizon. Each turn of the wheels carried him further from his pride, closer to the sustenance Samuel so desperately required. The infant's cry for milk rang in his head, a relentless reminder of his mission. He urged Bess onward, the setting sun painting long, dismal shadows across the parched earth. Harmony Gulch's hardships. A gritty wind, laden with the aroma of sun-baked earth and lost dreams, buffeted Jedediah long before he reached the crest overlooking Harmony Gulch. Almost a year had passed since his last visit, a year in which the relentless drought had tightened its stranglehold on the land. The once vibrant center for ranchers and farmers now resembled a parched husk, a testament to nature's cruelty. Buildings slumped like weary shoulders, flaking paint mirroring the town's fading spirit. The lively pulse he remembered had surrendered to a desolate quiet. Even the saloon, once echoing with revelry, stood mute, its doors bolted against the harsh light. He urged Dancer, his weathered Appaloosa, down the slope towards the main street. The few townsfolk he encountered glanced away, their faces masks of hardship and guarded suspicion. Jedediah understood. Prairie pride was a stubborn beast, and seeking aid often felt like confessing a personal failing rather than acknowledging a shared plight. He sought out the blacksmith first, but the familiar ring of hammer on anvil was conspicuously absent. The forge stood cold and inert. Dismounting, Jedediah approached the gaping entrance. Within, Silas, a man whittled down by worry, sat listlessly on a stool, his calloused hands idle. "Afternoon, Silas," Jedediah greeted, his voice raspy from disuse. Recognition flickered in Silas's sunken eyes. "Jedediah, long time. I'm in need of a kindness, Silas. Milk, for Samuel, my boy." Silas's gaze softened marginally, but he shook his head. "Milk's a luxury these days, Jedediah. My own cow went dry weeks back. We're all scraping by." He swept a hand towards the dormant forge. "Can't even shoe a nag. Nobody's got the spare change." A cold fist clenched in Jedediah's gut. He offered a thank you and moved on, each step weighted by growing despair. The butcher, the baker, even the schoolteacher, the same somber reply echoed in each encounter. Bare shelves, depleted pantries, and the ever-present dread of the coming days. Nearing the town's edge, by the creek bed now a jigsaw of cracked mud, he spotted Rusty, the town doctor, tending his horse. Gruff and more inclined to practical cures than bedside manner, Rusty was, nevertheless, a man of fairness, however blunt. "Rusty," Jedediah hailed. The doctor straightened, wiping his brow with a handkerchief stained with grime. "Jedediah, what brings you to Harmony Gulch? Finally come to settle your account, have you?" A faint smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Jedediah disregarded the teasing. "I need milk, Rusty. For Samuel. He's failing fast." Rusty's jocularity vanished. He scrutinized Jedediah, noting the worry lines spiderwebbing around his eyes, the gaunt hollows of his cheeks. "Times are hard all over, Jedediah," Rusty observed, his voice unexpectedly gentle. "But don't lose heart. This drought won't last forever. They never do." He clapped Jedediah on the shoulder, an uncharacteristic gesture of solace. "Keep your spirits up, son, and try Martha at the general store. She usually manages to squirrel away a little something." Jedediah nodded, a spark of hope igniting within the gloom. He thanked Rusty and turned Dancer towards the heart of town, his legs leaden with weariness, yet fueled by a renewed resolve. Martha's general store, the most substantial building in Harmony Gulch, possessed windows coated in dust, yet Jedediah recalled a well-stocked interior. He tethered Dancer and entered, the aroma of preserved herbs and aged leather a familiar comfort. Martha stood sentinel behind the counter, her gray hair a severe bun, her eyes sharp and observant. A woman of few words, her kindness was, nonetheless, renowned. Jedediah watched as she weighed out flour for a young mother, the woman's face a canvas of anxiety. Once the woman departed, Martha focused her attention on Jedediah. "Jedediah, isn't it? Haven't seen you around these parts in a while." He swallowed, his throat suddenly parched. "Martha, I need to ask a favor. It's for my boy, Samuel. He faltered, the words lodging in his throat. "He needs milk. I've tried everyone else, but—" His voice trailed off, unable to meet her gaze, the sting of his circumstance burning like acid. He heard the floorboards groan as Martha approached, his gaze fixed on a splintered fissure in the wooden floor. Martha's compassion. Martha watched Jedediah leave, his shoulders slumped beneath the weight of his desperation. The bell above the general store door gave a faint jingle as it swung shut, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence that had become Harmony Gulch's anthem. She leaned heavily against the counter, the smooth, worn wood cool against her forehead. Jedediah's plea had been a sharp, unwelcome jab at a wound she thought had scarred over long ago. A baby, sick, needing milk. Her own baby, Thomas, flickered in her memory, a fleeting image of chubby cheeks and a gurgling laugh. He'd been gone near on 15 years, taken by a fever that swept through the town like a thief in the night. The memory still tasted like ash in her mouth. Back then, neighbors had rallied, bringing soups and stories, offering what little comfort they could. But comfort couldn't bring Thomas back, and the well of her grief had seemed bottomless. She pushed herself upright, the ache in her joints a familiar companion. Jedediah's face, etched with worry, haunted her. He reminded her of her late husband, Samuel, same quiet strength, same unwavering love for his family. Samuel would have helped. Without hesitation, a new resolve hardened within her, pushing aside the years of grief and the ingrained practicality that kept her rooted to the general store. She couldn't just stand here, watching another child suffer. She wouldn't. Bess, she called out, her voice a little rough from disuse. Bess, a young woman with eyes as bright as polished pennies, emerged from the back room, wiping flour from her hands. I need you to mind the store for a bit. I'm going out to Whispering Creek. Bess's eyebrows shot up. Whispering Creek. But Martha, it's a long ride. And the heat, I know, Martha said, cutting her off. She didn't have time for arguments. Just watch the store. I'll be back before nightfall. She moved with a newfound purpose, her movements surprisingly brisk for a woman her age. From the shelves, she gathered a sturdy woven basket. Into it went a loaf of her freshly baked bread, still warm from the oven, a jar of preserved peaches, their golden sweetness a promise of better days, and a small, worn quilt, its faded colors a testament to countless nights spent tucked around her own children. She added a small tin of soothing balm, remembering how it had eased Thomas's fevered skin. As she packed, Martha's mind raced. Would Silas at Whispering Creek be willing to part with some milk? He was a hard man, known for his stubbornness and self-reliance. But he also had a soft spot for children, or so she'd heard whispered in the town square. She'd have to appeal to that side of him, remind him what it was like to hold a babe in your arms. The thought of Samuel fueled her determination. He'd always said she had a heart as big as the sky. Maybe, just maybe, that heart could still make a difference. She tied a sturdy bonnet beneath her chin, shielding her face from the relentless sun. The air outside was thick and heavy, shimmering with heat. The dust swirled around her ankles as she walked towards the small stable behind the store, the familiar smell of hay and horseflesh a comforting balm. Her old mare, Bessie, nickered softly as Martha approached, nuzzling her hand. "All right, girl," Martha murmured, stroking Bessie's velvety nose. "Let's see if we can't bring a little hope back to Harmony Gulch." A mother's instinct. The track to Whispering Creek was worse than Martha remembered, a rutted scar across the ochre landscape. The wagon wheels groaned in protest, each jolt a reminder of the urgency that propelled her. The air hung heavy with the scent of dry sage and dust, a stark contrast to the sweet, cloying aroma of sickness she'd left behind in Harmony Gulch. As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in hues of bruised purple and fiery orange, the outline of the Whispering Creek ranch emerged. Ranch was a generous term. The main house sagged, its porch tilting precariously, and the barn looked as if a stiff wind would send it tumbling. Fences were broken, corrals empty, and an overall air of neglect permeated the place. It was a far cry from the prosperous spread Silas had boasted about years ago. Martha pulled the wagon to a halt in the dusty yard. A lone dog, ribs showing beneath its matted fur, barked weakly from the porch before retreating back into the shadows. There was no other sign of life. "Jedediah," she called out, her voice echoing in the stillness. Only the mournful creak of the wind through the dilapidated structures answered her. Fear, cold and sharp, pierced through her resolve. She climbed down from the wagon, her boots sinking into the loose dirt. The crying started then, a thin, desperate wail that tugged at her heart. It was Samuel. She hurried towards the house, pushing open the warped front door without knocking. The interior was dim, lit only by the dying embers in the hearth. The air was thick with the smell of stale milk and unwashed linens. Jedediah was slumped in a chair beside a makeshift cradle, his head lolling against the back, fast asleep. Samuel's cries intensified, his tiny face red and contorted. Martha knelt beside the cradle, her hand instinctively reaching out to soothe him. His skin felt hot and dry beneath her fingertips. "Hush, little one," she murmured, her voice trembling. "I'm here now." She lifted him gently from the cradle, cradling him in her arms. He was so light, so fragile. His cries subsided slightly as he nestled against her, his tiny hands clutching at her shawl. Looking down at his face, she saw a reflection of both Jedediah and his departed wife. The curve of his brow mirrored Jedediah's weariness, but his eyes held a fierce spark of defiance, mirroring the tenacity of a mother determined to protect her child. She knew, with a certainty that resonated deep within her bones, that Samuel needed more than just milk. He needed comfort, he needed warmth, he needed the touch of a mother. Her gaze drifted to her own chest. She hadn't thought about it in years, not since her own loss. But the memory, dormant for so long, stirred within her. The ache, the yearning, the primal instinct to nurture and protect. She looked at Jedediah, still lost in his exhausted slumber. He was doing his best, she knew, but he was barely clinging to life himself. Samuel needed her. Without another thought, she unbuttoned her blouse, exposing her breast. It was a decision born not of logic, but of instinct, a deep-seated response to the desperate need in Samuel's eyes. The touch of his skin sent a jolt through her. He latched on immediately, suckling with a ferocity that surprised her. The sensation was strange, unfamiliar, yet strangely comforting. She closed her eyes, tears pricking at the corners. It had been so long, years, but the memory of holding her own child, of feeling that connection, flooded back. She wasn't trying to replace her own child. She knew that. But in this moment, holding Samuel close, she felt a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. She was a mother again, not in the way she had been before, but in a way that was just as real, just as profound. She held him close, whispering soothing words as he nursed. The weight of grief and regret momentarily lifted by the warmth of his small body against hers. The sound of his contented suckling filled the silence of the dilapidated house, a fragile melody of hope in the face of despair. She didn't know what the future held, but in that moment, she knew she had made the right decision. She would do whatever it took to protect this child, to give him the love and care he deserved. And in doing so, perhaps, she could finally heal a little piece of herself. An unexpected savior. A pounding headache reverberated through Jedediah's skull, centered somewhere behind his weary eyes. He blinked against the weak cabin light that filtered through the grime-coated windows, each sunbeam a painful lance. He'd been huddled against the wall, more a monument to fatigue than a sentinel. Samuel, he had to do something. A groan escaped him as he tried to rise, his body a chorus of aches. Then, as clarity returned, the scene held him captive. By the hearth, where flames sketched lively shadows on her features, sat Martha. But it was more than her mere presence that rendered him speechless. Curled in her embrace, Samuel suckled contentedly at her breast. Jedediah gaped, disbelief flooding his senses, rapidly followed by an unexpected relief. A raw, visceral tide of emotion surged through him, a feeling so intense he hadn't experienced it since losing Mary. Martha's gaze lifted, her eyes meeting his. He saw an openness there, a stark honesty that stripped away any pretense. "No flinch, no vertigas," A delicate rose bloomed on her neck, yet her eyes remained locked on his. His voice emerged as a rusty rasp. "Martha, what?" With infinite care, she shifted Samuel, mindful not to rouse him. A soft, sated sound escaped the infant's lips, a sound Jedediah hadn't heard in far too long. "He was famished, Jedediah," she offered, her voice a mere thread in the quiet room. "Desperate. I couldn't bear to watch him suffer." He swallowed hard, struggling to reconcile the image before him. It was a tableau of intimacy, of raw maternal instinct, a possibility he hadn't dared imagine. A bitter wave of inadequacy washed over him, a stark reminder of his own failings. He should have been able to care for his son. Strength should have been his to command. "I don't understand," he muttered, raking a hand through his tangled mane. You haven't." A flicker of pain crossed Martha's features. "It's unimportant," she countered, halting his words. "He needed sustenance, and I could provide it." Silence descended, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the snap and hiss of the fire and Samuel's rhythmic suckling. Jedediah watched, mesmerized. He saw the fatigue etched into Martha's face, the almost imperceptible tremor in her fingers, juxtaposed with a strength he hadn't suspected. "Thank you," he finally managed, the words inadequate, clumsy pebbles in the vastness of his gratitude. "Thank you, Martha, with all that I am." A small, exhausted smile touched her lips. "He's a beautiful baby, Jedediah. He deserves every chance." He could only nod, a lump obstructing any further words. He longed to delve into the past, to address the echoes of pain he glimpsed in her eyes, but the words remained trapped. It felt intrusive, like defiling a sanctuary. He stood for an eternity, simply observing. The flickering firelight danced across Martha's countenance, accentuating both the lines of weariness and the nascent serenity that seemed to grace her. He saw more than just his sister. He saw a woman reborn, finding solace and purpose in selfless acts. He retreated slowly, careful not to break the spell. He needed solitude to grapple with the implications of this revelation, not just for Samuel, but for himself, for Martha, for the fragile spark of hope that had ignited in the heart of Whispering Creek Ranch. Stumbling outside, he gasped at the cool night air, a bracing shock to his muddled senses. He leaned against the gnarled bark of an ancient oak, finding solace in its rough solidity. The weight of the situation pressed upon him, a tangible burden. He, who had felt so utterly abandoned, so irrevocably shattered, had been offered a lifeline. More than sustenance for his son, he'd been given something far more profound: compassion, connection, a nascent promise of redemption. Yet, what sacrifice would this demand of Martha? What old wounds would this reopen? He knew so little of the woman before him, the woman cradling his child. He squeezed his eyes shut, the image of Martha and Samuel branded onto his eyelids. He couldn't foresee the future, but one truth resonated with unwavering clarity. Their fates were now inextricably bound. And he, Jedediah, bore a debt beyond measure, a debt that transcended mere gratitude. He was duty-bound to safeguard her, to shield them both from the shadows that still loomed. Whispering Creek's new hope. The morning air, cleansed and crisp after the storm's departure, greeted them. Jedediah's gaze remained fixed on Martha as she guided his hands, showing the correct way to cradle Samuel, ensuring the infant's delicate neck found support. Her touch was assured and tender, a world apart from his own fumbling attempts. "He needs to feel secure," she murmured, her voice now serene, the lingering shadows of sadness banished. As if embraced, not merely born. Jedediah tried to mirror her technique, felt immense and awkward maneuvering the miniature, fragile form. A whimper escaped Samuel, a reddening of his face signaling his unease with the shift. A chuckle, a sound long absent from the ranch, rippled from Martha. "Sing to him," she encouraged. "Something simple. He recognizes your voice." Hesitation flickered across Jedediah's face. Singing had ceased with Sarah. He rasped his throat, the sound gravelly. A tune surfaced, one his mother used to murmur, a wordless melody, imperfectly pitched. Samuel stilled, his unfocused gaze locking onto Jedediah's face. Days dissolved into weeks. Martha's presence transformed the desolate ranch into a semblance of familial warmth. She instructed Jedediah on the art of preparing the formula, meticulously sterilizing bottles, and coaxing up a burp without undue movement. She unveiled the subtle cadences of Samuel's existence, the cries of hunger, the sighs of sleepiness, the quiet need for embrace. Steadily, the burden on Jedediah's spirit began to abate. He discovered himself anticipating Samuel's babbling coos and nascent smiles, the surprising strength in the baby's tiny grip on his finger. Restful nights became the norm, assured that Martha would answer Samuel's demands. One afternoon, Martha discovered Jedediah on the porch swing, Samuel nestled in his embrace, fast asleep. The familiar, wordless melody trickled from his lips. The harsh lines, etched by sorrow, seemed to have softened. "He looks at peace," Martha observed, settling beside him. "He is," Jedediah affirmed, his gaze unwavering from Samuel's serene face. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." She shrugged, visibly uncomfortable with the gratitude. "He needed someone. So did you." They shared a tranquil silence, punctuated only by the gentle squeak of the swing and the crickets' evening chorus. Wildflower perfume, released from the pots Martha had arranged near the porch, laced the air, small bursts of vibrant color against the weathered wood. Later that week, spurred by an inner shift, Jedediah confronted the untamed garden. Neglected since Sarah's departure, the riot of weeds served as a constant, painful accusation. Martha joined him, her grasp surprisingly robust as she wrestled with tenacious roots. "Sarah always had such a knack," Jedediah said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "She cherished this garden." Martha nodded, her gaze encompassing the chaotic tangle. "We can resurrect it," she declared, her voice imbued with resolve. Together. And so they did. They wrested back the land from the weeds, turned the soil, and sowed fresh seeds. They worked in concert, their movements becoming synchronized, a silent language blooming between them. The garden, once an emblem of loss, metamorphosed into a testament of hope. One evening, Samuel finally slumbering, Jedediah sought Martha out in the barn, attending to the horses. The twilight sun painted elongated shadows, bathing the scene in hues of molten gold and amber. "I haven't properly expressed my gratitude," he said, leaning against the stall, his voice earnest. For feeding Samuel." Martha avoided his gaze, absently brushing a stray wisp of hair from her face. "It was nothing. It was everything," Jedediah insisted. "You saved him, Martha. You saved me, too." He closed the distance between them, his eyes searching hers for a truth he needed to find. He detected a flicker of vulnerability, a hint of the suffering she diligently concealed. He extended a hand, gently enveloping hers. Her skin was rough, etched with calluses from work, yet her touch radiated warmth. "Why did you do it, Martha?" he probed softly. "Why did you help us?" She hesitated, her gaze dropping to the packed earth floor. I lost a child," she confessed in a whisper, the words scarcely audible. "A long time ago." The confession hung weightily in the air, saturated with unspoken grief. Jedediah tightened his hold, offering silent solace. He didn't require the details. He understood, intimately familiar with the devastation and emptiness of such a loss. "I'm so sorry, Martha," he offered, emotion clogging his throat. Raising her gaze, her eyes gleamed with unshed tears, she replied, I couldn't bear to watch another child suffer. I simply couldn't." He drew her into an embrace, holding her close against his chest. She initially resisted, then yielded, a tremor running through her. He held her until the trembling subsided, the silence broken only by the quiet rustling of the horses within their stalls. There, in the dying light filtering through the barn, a profound connection was forged, deeper than either of them could have predicted, a bond born from shared grief, nurtured by compassion and strengthened by the mutual desire for a brighter horizon. Whispering Creek Ranch, once a sanctuary of sorrow, was gradually evolving into a safe haven, a testament to the regenerative power of love and human connection. Storms of the heart. The wind keened, a mournful cry that resonated within the timbers of the ranch house, unsettling Jedediah. He paused, the small wooden horse he'd been carving frozen in his grasp. Outside, the once serene cerulean sky had curdled into a bruised, violet swirl, heavy with promise of tempest. Storms brewing. He rumbled, more to himself than Martha, who crooned a soft lullaby, rocking Samuel. Her melody faltered, her attention drawn to the menacing sky. The air itself seemed charged, the cottonwood leaves flashing their silvery undersides in frantic semaphore. "A wicked one, I fear," Martha murmured, her voice thin against the rising gale. She cradled Samuel tighter, instinct overriding reason. "Jedediah, set the unfinished toy down. We gotta batten down the hatches. Barn, animals, everything." He snatched his worn oilskins from the peg. "Martha, fetch the laundry and secure the south shutters." She simply nodded, laying Samuel in his cradle with infinite care. The rocker ceased its gentle rhythm, replaced by the ominous creaks and groans as the house braced for the onslaught. As Jedediah struggled with the barn doors, their hinges emitted rusty shrieks of protest. The wind seemed to double in force. He caught the scent of approaching rain, a pungent, earthy tang on the increasingly savage gusts. Inside their stalls, the horses jittered, their eyes wide with primal dread. He soothed them with soft words and reassuring strokes, then hurried to reinforce the remaining outbuildings. Martha moved with practiced grace, retrieving the laundry where the garments danced like spectral figures in the tempestuous wind. The shutters, stubbornly swollen with age, resisted, but with effort, she secured them, the latches clicking shut in the encroaching gloom. As the first heavy raindrops splattered against the dry earth, Jedediah burst into the house, drenched. "It's here," he declared, shaking off the water like a dog. "And she's a real banshee." The storm's fury erupted. Rain hammered the windows, blurring the world into a gray wash. Thunder cracked, rattling the very bones of the house. Samuel flinched in his sleep, his small body convulsing. Martha flew to his side, whispering comfort. Jedediah watched them, a tight knot of worry twisting in his gut. He was responsible, not just for the land, but for them, for Martha and Samuel. He would not fail them. For hours, the tempest raged, an unrelenting assault on their fragile sanctuary. They huddled in the main room, their faces illuminated by the flickering lamplight. Jedediah spun yarns of past tempests, tales of fortitude and survival, his voice a firm anchor amidst the chaos. Martha added her own memories, her voice a soothing balm. As if answering Jedediah's pause, a frantic moo tore through the storm's cacophony. It was Bess. Jedediah exchanged a quick, worried glance with Martha before grabbing his lantern and heading back out into the deluge. Martha followed, pulling her shawl tight, a sturdy branch offering balance against the gusts. The barn was a maelstrom of animal distress. Bess was agitated, her flanks heaving as she paced in her confines. Jedediah approached with caution, speaking in low, calming tones. He examined her udder. It was tight and distended. "She's ready, Martha, but she's spooked." Martha stepped forward, extending a hand. She began to hum a simple, calming melody. Bess seemed to respond, her pacing slowing, her breathing evening. Jedediah swiftly readied the milking stool and pail. Encouraged by Martha's humming, Bess eventually settled, and Jedediah began to milk. The warm liquid streamed into the bucket, a comforting symbol of hope amidst the turmoil. Back in the house, Martha fed Samuel the fresh milk. His eyes drifted closed, and he slipped back into slumber, his tiny belly full and content. Jedediah watched them, his heart swelling with thankfulness. Unseen, a figure stood on the distant ridge, outlined against the jagged lightning. Abby, the town busybody, had come to assess the damage, eager to peddle tales of misfortune. But what she witnessed halted her in her tracks. She saw Jedediah and Martha, united in purpose, their faces reflecting worry, yes, but also an unyielding strength. She saw the lantern's warm glow in the window, a beacon piercing the darkness. She saw not a broken man and a grieving widow, but a family. And for the first time, a flicker of something akin to empathy, perhaps even grace, touched the hard angles of her face. She turned her horse and rode away. A prairie promise. The storm's exit left the prairie invigorated, the atmosphere cleansed and alive with the fragrance of dewy soil and emerging blossoms. Jedediah scanned the spread, barn roof repaired, fences standing tall once more, and livestock contentedly grazing. Even Abby's quiet assistance served as a wordless acknowledgement of the previous night's shared trial. Yet, more than the rebuilt infrastructure or the resulting tranquility, it was Martha who occupied Jedediah's thoughts. He observed her from a distance as she attended to Samuel near the stream. Sunlight kissed the auburn tendrils that escaped her braid, illuminating her face with a soft radiance. He perceived not merely a caretaker, but a woman of unyielding fortitude, one who had embraced his fractured existence and infused it with hope. He recalled the desperation clinging to his voice when he'd pleaded for milk, and the quiet steel in her gaze as she offered sustenance far beyond the bowl. Like a thunderclap delayed, the realization resonated. He was profoundly in love with her. Not the ephemeral infatuation of youth, but a deep, abiding affection nurtured by shared adversity and mutual respect. A love as unshakable as the earth beneath their boots. He grappled with this revelation throughout the day, transforming mundane chores into labors of devotion. Each fence post driven, each cow tended, was now imbued with the purpose of their shared future. He resolved to delay no longer. He had to speak his heart. As twilight painted the sky in hues of fiery rose and lavender, he discovered Martha seated on the porch, Samuel nestled asleep in her arms. He knelt beside her, his rough hand lightly touching hers. "Martha," he began, his voice thick with feeling, "there's something I need to tell you." She turned to him, her eyes mirroring the fading light. "What is it, Jedediah?" He inhaled deeply, drawing in the prairie air. "These past months, they've been the most challenging I've ever known. Yet, ironically, the most fulfilling. You entered my life when I was adrift, offering kindness where I had nothing to give. You cared for Samuel, you cared for me. You offered a beacon when all seemed lost." He hesitated, searching for the precise words. "I didn't comprehend it initially, but witnessing you with Samuel, observing the boundless love you bestow, it transformed me, Martha. It unveiled what was possible, and the truth settled within me. I love you." He scrutinized her face, seeking any clue, any indication of her response. Her expression remained veiled, a blend of surprise mingled with an emotion he couldn't quite define. He continued, his voice gaining conviction. "I know I possess little to offer. I am a humble rancher, shouldering a wounded spirit and carrying the weight of past failings. However, I vow to dedicate my life to your happiness. I will treasure you and Samuel. I will cultivate a life with you here, on this ranch, a life brimming with love and joy." He reached into his pocket and produced a simple, aged silver ring. It had been his mother's. "It is a meager offering, yet all I possess. Will you do me the immense honor of becoming my wife, Martha?" The silence hung heavy between them, punctuated only by the chorus of crickets and the distant cry of a coyote. Finally, Martha spoke, her voice a soft murmur. Jedediah, tears glistened in her eyes, restrained from falling. She reached out and clasped his hand, their fingers intertwining. "Yes, Jedediah. Yes, I will." He felt a wave of exhilaration cascade over him, almost buckling his knees. He slid the ring onto her finger, the tarnished silver catching the moon's glow. He leaned in and kissed her a gentle, heartfelt kiss that solidified their pact beneath the expansive prairie heavens. Time progressed. Whispering Creek Ranch blossomed anew. The fields yielded abundant harvests, the livestock thrived, and the barn resounded with the melodies of life. Jedediah and Martha labored together, their bond deepening with each passing day. Samuel, now a rambunctious toddler, dashed through the fields, his laughter echoing across the landscape. He possessed Jedediah's eyes and Martha's spirit, a perfect amalgamation of the two individuals who cherished him above all else. Abby, now a frequent guest, often lent a hand with the chores, her former severity softened by the family's warmth. The ranch had evolved into a sanctuary, a haven where broken souls discovered solace and the promise of a fresh start. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, bathing the sky in a tapestry of gold and scarlet, Jedediah stood on the porch, watching Martha and Samuel at play in the yard. Martha glanced up and beamed, her eyes radiant with contentment. In that instant, Jedediah knew he had discovered everything he had ever desired, right here on the prairie, with the woman he adored and the son he treasured. Whispering Creek Ranch transcended its physical boundaries. It represented a promise fulfilled, a testament to the redemptive power of love and unwavering resilience.